Welcome to the Renaissance Spirit.
To the eyes of posterity, I unveil myself not as the ruler the history books might paint, but as a man born from modest soil, raised on hard virtues, and destined for a throne few thought I'd ever see. My life was a testament to the whims of fate, which would catapult me from the humblest beginnings to the mighty seat of the Roman Empire. Yet I stood for something deeper, something that still pulses in the hearts of those who hunger for freedom, justice, and equality. I was born in Alba Pompeia in 126 AD, not into the nobility but into a simple family of the middle class. My father, Helvius Pertinax, was a freedman, a former slave, and a tradesman by profession. He was neither wealthy nor powerful, but was known for his tireless work ethic and honor, qualities he passed on to me, though perhaps a bit too heavily. Our bond was one of admiration mixed with a respectful distance. But through his stern guidance, I grew resilient and disciplined. My mother, on the other hand, was my compass of compassion, filling our home with warmth even in the bleakest of times. Her influence was my moral bedrock, as essential to my spirit as the legions would become to my rise. Education was not simply encouraged, but mandated in our household. My father saved diligently for my schooling, impressing upon me the transformative power of learning, especially for someone born of our station. Unlike the sons of senators, I did not have access to the elite academies of Rome. Instead, my tutors were local philosophers and learned men of the province, whose humility sharpened my mind and tempered my ambitions with wisdom. It was a humble beginning, but one that prepared me for the unpredictable tides ahead. Now, to understand my story, you must know that each rung I climbed on the Roman ladder was not without sacrifice. I wrestled with duty and loyalty, ambition and restraint, but the shadows of my humble past would come back to haunt me, even on the throne. Yet this past shaped my commitment to fairness and inspired a vision for an empire that might value every voice, from slaves to senators. That was my dream, though the world often crushed such lofty ideals. Prepare yourself as I take you into the labyrinthine halls of power, where I climbed against all odds, and you shall see how the modest son of a freedman rose to the highest office in the land. The path to Rome's throne is neither straight nor gentle. I began my career not as an aspiring emperor, but as a school teacher, a humble grammaticus who spent his days passing language and disciplining students. Yet I always hungered for more, restless with a sense that my life held a larger purpose. It was at this crossroad that fate intervened, drawing me into the military, a decision that, unbeknownst to me then, would pave the way to the palace of the Caesars. After joining the Roman army, I quickly gained a reputation for my resilience and strategic mind. I served in Syria, Britain, and across the empire, from the frost-bitten lands of the Danube to the scorching sands of Africa. My promotions came swiftly as my superiors noticed my discipline and loyalty. Each battle brought new honors, new titles, and with them a proximity to power. In these years, I became close to the soldiers under my command, and I saw the injustice many endured, the inequities of pay, the harsh conditions. I came to view these men not merely as subordinates, but as brothers. It was this fraternity that drove me to envision a Rome that could stand as a beacon of fairness and humanity. When the time came for my transition to the political stage, I was seasoned by decades of service and ready for the tribulations that awaited me in the Senate. My rise through the senatorial ranks drew envy, but also admiration. Despite my modest beginnings, I was relentless in pushing for reforms that reflected the values I had developed during my military career. I wanted to see a Rome where leaders worked for the people, not for wealth or power alone. Then came the death of Emperor Commodus, a figure whose rule had plunged the empire into corruption and chaos. With Commodus gone, the Praetorian Guard sought a leader who could bring stability, and the Senate saw in me a moderate, someone who understood the common man. In 193 AD, after much persuasion, I accepted the throne, my heart filled with both hope and foreboding. I would become the emperor, a title that could elevate or destroy a man, and I knew the dangers that lay ahead. It is here, in my reluctant acceptance of Rome's crown, that my story truly begins to test the boundaries of fate. I stepped into an empire divided, with enemies within and without, and the memories of my humble origins remained vivid in my mind. As I crossed the palace threshold, I could not help but wonder if this new title would bring the change I dreamed of, or if it would consume me. Taking the throne of Rome was like walking into a storm one Commodus had left raging, unchecked for too long. Where Commodus had been reckless, extravagant and feared, I aimed to restore a sense of dignity and balance to the empire. My every decision was measured by the questions: is this just? Will it benefit the people? Yet I also felt the weight of the Praetorian Guard and Senate, who, while cheering my accession, harbored expectations that would eventually clash with my ideals. In the early days, I enacted reforms that would set the tone for my short but tumultuous reign. Commodus had drained the treasury with his hedonism, and so my first task was to restore Rome's finances. I curbed excessive spending, reduced palace luxuries, and made attempts to replenish the treasury. I remember the shock in the Senate when I, an emperor, refused lavish gifts and extravagant feasts. Instead, I poured resources back into the army and civil projects, wanting to repair what had crumbled under my predecessors' indulgence. To the dismay of the nobility, I cut down their stipends and redirected funds to support the commoners, the backbone of the empire. I believed firmly that an empire's strength lay in the prosperity of its people, not just its privileged few. As these reforms took root, comparisons to Commodus grew. Where he had ruled by fear, I sought to lead by example, with honesty and transparency. I encouraged senators and officials to speak openly and expected all citizens to be treated fairly in court. But this desire for fairness quickly gained me enemies. To those accustomed to Commodus's corruption, my reign felt like an affront, a slap to the web of power they had grown accustomed to. Even so, I felt I was turning a corner, that my vision of a fairer Rome might take hold. But these early victories would be short-lived, for the ambition of Rome's powerful factions would not stand for an emperor who put justice before politics. The Praetorian Guard, always lurking in the background, saw their income reduced under my reign, a move that would stoke the fires of treachery. Still, I pressed forward, believing that if I could establish a new standard for leadership, future emperors might carry on the torch. I did not foresee that my greatest challenge would not be in battle or senate, but in the shadowed corridors of my own palace. The crown, it seems, exacts a price that few are willing to pay. Only months into my reign, I sensed the rumblings of dissent within the Praetorian Guard, that iron force meant to protect the emperor, but so often driven by its own motives. I had known from the start that my reforms had struck them as a threat. I had trimmed their privileges, their undue bribes and allowances, resources I believed belonged to Rome itself. Yet I had trusted, foolishly perhaps, that honor and reason might prevail over avarice. It was on a grey morning in March in the year 193 AD when their intentions became known. I was in my quarters, discussing yet another set of policies I hoped would stabilize our stretched resources, when I heard the metallic clang of weapons echoing through the palace corridors. The guard had come not with allegiance but with betrayal etched into their faces. My advisors turned pale, but I resolved to face them as a leader who had served his soldiers in the field, as a man whose life had been defined by honor. They burst into the room and I demanded an audience as one last appeal to reason. But reason had long departed, replaced by the promise of a bribe that the nobles had likely dangled before them. Still, I remember my heart was steady as I spoke. "Is this the loyalty Rome breeds now?" I asked. hoping some spark of honor would stir in their ranks. But their stony silence was my answer. In their eyes, I saw the greed that had undermined everything I had fought for. The end came swiftly. A flash of steel, a blow to the chest, and the palace filled with the tumult of betrayal. The empire I sought to heal watched as the emperor, who stood for justice and balance, was struck down by those sworn to protect him. In my final moments, I knew my death was not just mine. It was the death of an ideal, the moment that revealed the raw thirst for power lurking in Rome's heart. Yet as the world dimmed, I did not despair. I had sown seeds of reform, of a dream for a Rome that might one day value its people's liberty and welfare. Perhaps my death would stand as a martyr's testimony, a lesson to those who would come after me. And so, with my last breath, I held on to a slender thread of hope, for I had lived as a man of principle, and I would die the same. With my death, it might seem that my vision for Rome perished with me, lost to the swords of the very men who should have safeguarded it. Yet, history has a way of resurrecting ideals when least expected. In the days that followed, Rome was shaken. The people grieved, not merely for the fallen emperor, but for the sense of justice and integrity that had seemed within reach, if only for a brief moment. In the eyes of my supporters and allies, my short reign of 86 days came to symbolize a Rome that could have been a beacon of stability, one where emperors ruled for the people rather than their own enrichment. The Senate, though initially divided, began to recognize the value in my approach to leadership, and whispers of admiration grew into discussions of reform. Stories of my refusal to accept bribes, my cuts to lavish expenditures, and my emphasis on fairness in the courts became tales that spread among the common folk and soldiers alike. The emperors who came after me would be haunted by my shadow, forced to reckon with the memory of a man who had ruled not as a tyrant, but as a servant of Rome's ideals. Though they could not fully emulate my principles, some were inspired to temper their own indulgences and embrace reforms that aligned with my vision, if only for fear of provoking the people's wrath. I became known not just as an emperor, but as a symbol of what could be achieved if leaders placed honor above ambition. And so, my legacy endured in the consciousness of the Roman people. I had challenged the empire's trajectory, even if only for a moment. My story began to serve as a warning and an inspiration, a reminder that Rome's true power lay not in its riches or armies, but in the loyalty and welfare of its people. In time, I would be regarded as a man who walked a path few dared tread, who embodied a fleeting glimpse of fairness amid Rome's brutal politics. My ideals, though left unfulfilled, would ripple through history, inspiring those who would later seek to lead with compassion and integrity, nurturing a dream of Rome as a place where the lives of all her citizens, not just her rulers, might flourish. Now, as you look back upon my life, my choices, and my end, you may wonder, was it all worth it? To risk everything, to stand alone in the face of treachery, and to defend an ideal against the storm of corruption that threatened to consume it? I confess, the question haunted me even as I took my last breaths. For what is an emperor if not a servant of his people? In truth, I did not ascend the throne seeking power for its own sake. I took the title of emperor because I believed Rome could be a force of compassion, fairness, and liberty, a Rome that valued each citizen, not just the wealthy and powerful few. I strove for a world where laws applied equally to all, and where even an emperor would be bound by justice, not tyranny. I saw the potential for a more humane empire, one where voices of dissent could ring without fear, and where the fruits of peace might be shared by all. Freedom, equality, and democracy may have been distant ideals for my time, but I dreamed of their possibility. A just and balanced rule could bring Rome closer to this vision, granting its citizens, from slaves to senators, a voice in the shaping of our shared future. In life, I fought for these principles, believing that true strength lay in an empire united by respect, compassion, and a commitment to the common good. My reign may have been brief, But if even one person is inspired to carry forth these ideals, then my efforts were not in vain. To those who seek to understand the true meaning of leadership, I offer my story. The throne demands sacrifices and loyalty to ideals larger than oneself. And though my time as emperor was short, my commitment to justice and freedom endures in memory, a call to those who would wield power with honor. In the quiet places of Rome today, remnants of my legacy linger, whether in the ancient streets of Alba Pompeia, my birthplace, or in the grandeur of the imperial palaces where I dared to dream of reform. For those who wish to walk in the footsteps of the past, these sites offer not just glimpses of history, but a deeper understanding of a Rome that aspired to something more. Ancient coins bearing my likeness tell their own stories, symbols of a reign committed to the ideals of equity and honor. To collectors and historians alike, they serve as reminders of a man who believed in the power of change, though it came at great cost. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Here at Renaissance Spirit, we seek a world that embraces knowledge, compassion, and justice, values rooted in the past, yet desperately needed in our present. Through our videos, we strive to honor these ideals, covering history, politics, culture, and philosophy. The Renaissance itself was a beacon for humanity's potential, and by revisiting the past, we gain wisdom to shape a brighter future. Subscribe to our channel, enable notifications, and share if you believe in the pursuit of truth, equity, and knowledge. Explore other videos, take our quiz, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. But remember, history is not a relic. It is a living force, a guide for the journey ahead. Vive Renaissance Spiritus!